Laenor Velaryon Origins, writer of Seasmoke and first husband of Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, explored. House of the Dragon has been off to a flying start, and that is thanks to its laser-focused approach to storytelling. House of the Dragon, as the name suggests, is all about the Targaryens, at the height of their power in Westeros. But that does not mean other houses do not play a major role in the story. The Hightowers are going to serve as the primary antagonists for Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen. Episode 3 made that much pretty clear, and her major allies are going to be a house that has lost all its prestige by the time Robert Baratheon won the Iron Throne.
House Velaryon's origins reach back to old Valyria.
House Velaryon was also at the peak of its power when King Viserys ruled the Seven Kingdoms, and their hopes and futures rested squarely upon the shoulders of this Roman-nosed boy. Laenor Velaryon is the first son born to Lord Corlys and his wife Princess Rhaenys, but he is also so much more than that. He is the first Velaryon dragon rider, the first official prince consort in Westerosi history, and his story is going to be as important to House of the Dragon as his father's. So, without further ado, this is Laenor Velaryon's Origins Explored, and this is your spoiler warning because there will be a lot of those in this video. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Men would sooner put the realm to the torch than see a woman ascend the Iron Throne.
A brief history of House Velaryon, the first Lord Admirals of the Seven Kingdoms. When you think about Valyria, you would be forgiven in thinking that the only people who truly mattered from their lineage were the Dragon Lords. Well, you would be right, of course, because those 40 families could boast of something no one else in the known world could, being fully functional dragon riders. But where you would be wrong is in thinking that the Dragon Lords were it when it came to the Valyrian race, because those 40 families are only the peak of the mountain that was their freehold. At the height of its power, Old Valyria ruled over everything east and west of their volcanic peninsula, covering the skies with their dragons and the seas with their ships. The Valyrians had a chokehold on trade in Essos for thousands of years, and if you think that they were delegating this work to some of the people they enslaved, then you are taking them very lightly. The reach of a Valyrian seafarer was just as far and wide as that of a Dragon Lord, except their domain was the open ocean, and House Velaryon counts itself amongst one of those ancient seafaring Valyrian nobles. Their family histories say that they arrived in Westeros even before the Targaryens did, and Velaryon legends claim they received the Driftwood throne from the Merling King as a gift born out of a pact, though it is more likely that the throne was a truce gift from the previous inhabitants of the island of Driftmark, where this ancient house appears first in the annals of written history. The Lord of Castle Driftmark also holds the titles Master of Driftmark, presumably for taking charge of the Isle, and Lord of the Tides, after the waves of tides that brought the driftwood to the shores of the island that was named after them. Having set themselves up at the most strategically favorable position in the Gullet, House Velaryon forged relationships with House Celtigar of Claw Isle, another noble family of Valyrian descent, and practically monopolized trade in the Narrow Sea for the remnants of Old Valyria. After the Targaryen family moved to Dragonstone, these three Valyrian noble families would go on to strengthen ties with each other and thereby secure all trade through the Gullet for themselves. Velaryon and Celtigar's ships could handle business on the seas, while Targaryen dragons would rule over the skies, and this relationship eventually extended beyond trade alliances too, as House Velaryon is the first house to have married into the Targaryen family, and vice versa. Though it is unclear when intermarriage between the two families began, it makes a ton of sense. Velaryons having the blood of Old Valyria have distinctively Valyrian features: silver hair, purple eyes, and pale skin, so it's only natural that the two Valyrian families in the Gullet would intermarry at some point to keep their bloodlines pure and mostly sane. You can only get away with so much incest after all, and the first recorded instance of a Targaryen marrying a Velaryon comes from the Century of Blood, when Lady Valenna Velaryon's father married a Targaryen daughter, making her half Targaryen herself. Valenna would go on to marry Lord Aerion Targaryen, and together they would have 3 children: Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys. That's right, the three conquerors were born from a Velaryon mommy, and Lord Aegon's first Lord Admiral and Master of Ships was a Velaryon as well, as Lord Daemon Velaryon became the first Admiral of the Royal Fleet and supplied the ships that facilitated Aegon's landing at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. It is unclear as to whether Daemon was Aegon's cousin or uncle, but what is undisputed is his friendship with the first High King of all Westeros, as after his death, his son Aethan succeeded him as both Master of Ships and Lord of the Tides, with the small council position of Master of Ships becoming almost hereditary. For the first 50 years of Targaryen rule, a Velaryon held that position, and the last Velaryon to hold that position, a different Daemon Velaryon, was even said to think of his own house as the second house of the realm, given the fact that his sister Alyssa was a queen, and the fact that House Velaryon were amongst the Targaryens' foremost supporters. Daemon would also go on to become King Jaehaerys' Hand of the King, making him the first Velaryon to ever hold that office. Between that and the fact that the first Lord Commander of the Kingsguard was also a Velaryon, you can see just how closely House Velaryon was tied to the Iron Throne, and this trend seemed to be set to be followed when Lord Corlys Velaryon, grandson of the Daemon Velaryon who served as Hand, was named to the position of Master of Ships by Jaehaerys following his legendary 9 voyages. In fact, the Sea Snake took it a step further and ended up marrying into the royal family himself. After serving as Master of Ships for a year, Corlys Velaryon married Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, the eldest daughter of Crown Prince Aemon and Queen Alysanne's chosen candidate to succeed Jaehaerys. It was assumed that after the Conciliator's eldest living son Aemon inherited the throne, Rhaenys would follow in her father's footsteps, seeing as she was his eldest child. But after the prince passed away, thanks to an errant Myrish crossbow bolt, the king decided to pass over Rhaenys and made his eldest surviving son Baelon the Prince of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne. Though Baelon too would not inherit the Iron Throne, Jaehaerys' actions alienated House Targaryen's oldest and now richest and most powerful allies. Thanks to his 9 voyages, Lord Corlys Velaryon had enough wealth to rival both the Lannisters and the Hightowers in terms of sheer financial strength. He had tripled the size of the Velaryon fleet, also the Royal Fleet, during his 3 years as Master of Ships. And after the old king slighted his lady wife, the Sea Snake resigned from his post and took his ships back to Driftmark. Over the course of the next 9 years, relations between the Velaryons and the Targaryens would remain strained, as Rhaenys upheld her claim to the Iron Throne and was backed by her husband and her mother's family. House Baratheon and Jaehaerys refused to remove Baelon as his heir. In 92 AC, the same year that Aemon died, Rhaenys gave birth to her first child, the Lady Laenor Velaryon, but because she was a female, she did not help bolster Rhaenys' claim or change the status quo in her favor. That would happen a couple of years later, when Rhaenys would give birth to her second child and the subject of this video.
They denied you, Princess Rhaenys. The queen who never was.
The only son of the queen who never was. Why Laenor Velaryon is so important in Fire and Blood. In 94 AC, the political rivalry between Corlys Velaryon's family and King Jaehaerys' royal court heated up immensely because the Sea Snake had just welcomed his first son into the world. Laenor Velaryon was born with all the features of a true Valyrian. He had silver-gray hair, a Roman nose, and purple eyes, traits he strongly inherited from both of his parents. Laenor's birth stoked the flames of the tension between the first 2 houses of Westeros. Well, 3 if you count House Baratheon as well. And we certainly do here. Even though Prince Baelon was firmly established as the next heir to the Iron Throne, Lord Corlys and Princess Rhaenys pressed Laenor's claim over him, as he could trace his descent back to Jaehaerys' eldest son overall, and the laws of primogeniture would somewhat be in his favor. Laenor spent the first 7 years of his life as a political pawn, almost, seeing as his very existence had deepened the rift between King's Landing and Driftmark. So when Prince Baelon passed away in 101 AC, the turmoil nearly came to a boiling point. King Jaehaerys was stumped as to how he should handle the matter of succession, and was also losing his wits towards the end of his life, making his judgment unreliable. And on top of that, the The small council received word that Lord Corlys was gathering men and ships at Driftmark to defend Laenor's rights, as he clearly thought his son should succeed Jaehaerys on the Iron Throne. In Corlys's mind, Laenor had the better claim, but more than that, he also possessed his very own dragon. It is said in Fire and Blood that by 101 AC, young Laenor had bonded with the pale silver-gray dragon Seasmoke, though he had not ridden him yet. It is possible that Laenor got Seasmoke's egg in the cradle, or he was given Seasmoke from the hatcheries of Dragonstone, following Balon's passing. We'll discuss this more in our Seasmoke video, so keep an eye out for that. Regardless of where he got Seasmoke, the fact that he had him made all the difference, because most credible candidates to ascend the Iron Throne till that point had been dragon riders. King Jaehaerys called his son Archmaester Vaegon, and on his advice convened the Great Council of 101 AC, where claims were heard across all of Westeros, including the son of a common woman who claimed his descent from Gaemon the Glorious, who died towards the beginning of the Century of Blood. At the council itself, Princess Rhaenys was firmly deposed as a possible heir because the lords of the realm would not allow a woman to rule over them. The final vote came down to Laenor Velaryon and the late Prince Balon's eldest son Viserys. Lord Corlys and Princess Rhaenys used all their wealth and influence in order to secure what they felt was their son's birthright. They managed to sway the Starks, the Manderleys, the Dustins, the Blackwoods, the Bar-Emons, and the Celtigars to their side, and together with Boromund Baratheon's support, they had at least 2 great houses supporting Laenor's claim. And more than that, Laenor had an established dragon bond that he could visibly display, whereas Viserys had been dragonless for nearly a decade by the time he came up for contention at the council. Having a dragon was, until that point, a key indicator of a Targaryen's right to rule, and so Laenor's claim was not entirely without merit, but it wasn't devoid of issues either. Laenor was only 7 years of age when he stood for contention at the Great Council, not at all fit to rule over anything for at least a decade, whereas Viserys was already 24, a man grown. Laenor's regency would surely benefit House Velaryon the most, whilst with Viserys, a regency would not even be required. And moreover, Laenor was the eldest son of the eldest daughter of the deceased crown prince. Westerosi custom would have never allowed the female line to take the precedence over the male line unless it was through sheer conquest, so Laenor never truly stood a chance. Though the final vote of the Great Council was never revealed, it was said Laenor lost the vote 1-20, which pretty much tells you all you need to know about medieval society's views on gender in politics. The political fallout from this decision was significant for both House Targaryen and House Velaryon, but Laenor himself seemed to be rather unbothered. Fire and Blood doesn't tell us much about the young claimant other than the fact that his dragon Seasmoke was his pride and passion. Given that his sister Laena was also known to love to fly, we would say that the Velaryon siblings wanted to trade in their masts and sails for the skies, but Laenor Velaryon himself would not become relevant again until another matter involving the royal succession came up in 113 AC, and this time, it was somehow simpler and more complicated than convening a great council with thousands of lords.
Why would you need a dragon pit?
To house dragons, of course.
The first official prince consort of Westeros, Laenor Velaryon's marriage to Rhaenyra Targaryen. When Rhaenyra came of age and took possession of Dragonstone in 113 AC, the matter of her marriage became the primary topic of discussion for Viserys' small council. The Princess of Dragonstone was not without suitors. She had been propositioned by both Lannister twins. The sons of Lords Blackwood and Bracken had fought a duel over her hand, and even the heir to Highgarden was making overtures to try to get the Tyrells in bed with the royal family, which would not happen for over a century and a half. For his part, King Viserys pondered a match between his daughter and Prince Quarren Martell to finally unify all of Westeros under Targaryen rule, whilst Queen Alicent suggested her toddler son Aegon. After many deliberations, the small council decided that it would be in the realm's best interest to heal the rift between its first two houses. Lord Corlys had not had a seat on the small council for over 2 decades because of Rhaenys' rights being stolen, and after Viserys ignored his council's advice and married Alicent instead of Laenor Velaryon, House Velaryon boycotted the royal wedding. Hoping that the third time would be the charm, Laenor Velaryon was put forth as a candidate, but there was only one problem. It was observed that though Laenor had reached 19 years of age, he had never been seen with women. choosing to surround himself with beautiful knights and squires instead. His favorite champion was Sir Joffrey Lonmouth, who was also called the Knight of Kisses and was allegedly Laenor's lover. Laenor seemed to not have a taste for battle because despite his advanced age and the fact that he should have had the best trainers at high tide to train him at arms, he was not a knight yet. Sir Criston Cole, by this time Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, would go so far as to claim that boys had not been safe around Laenor in later years, implying a darker nature to his preferences. But the reply that we found most apt and hilarious was the one Grand Maester Maellos gave to the discussion. When the matter of Laenor's preferences was brought up, Maellos simply said, "What of it? I am not fond of fish, but when fish is served, I eat it." It is said that this is how the royal match was decided, and personally, we can't wait to hear this line in House of the Dragon, because it is one of the most iconic and only lines of dialogue from Fire and Blood. But still, Laenor and Rhaenyra were wedded in 114 AC at King's Landing in a ceremony that can only be called ominous. The Prince Consort gave his favor to his Knight of Kisses, as usual, but Sir Joffrey drew the worst opponent he possibly could in the lists. He came up against a pissed-off Sir Criston Cole, who introduced his fists and Morningstar to the knight from Lonmouth so savagely he literally beat him within an inch of his life, and then some. In fact, we think it is this exact scene that is playing out in the House of the Dragon trailers. It's either this or Criston going up against Harwin Strong, which is another feisty fight we cannot wait to see happen. Suffice to say that after the tourney came to an end, Sir Laenor returned to Driftmark while Rhaenyra remained at court, and the couple would only come together on important occasions. Despite being somewhat estranged, the royal couple would end up having 3 children, though their parentage was disputed, given the prince's looks and Laenor's tastes. He would name his 3rd son after his Knight of Kisses, but would not live long enough to see any of them grow into men, because Laenor Velaryon, like his sister, are going to be the first major characters from House of the Dragon to miss the actual civil war. And because we don't feel like ruining the actual story of the show, why don't we segue into talking about Laenor's on-screen portrayal, and how it might remind you of another character from Game of Thrones.
Archers hold their high positions, foot soldiers hold the ground. We've strafed them on Dragonback again and again, but they just retreat within the caves.
He's House of the Dragon's Renly Baratheon minus the kinslaying, Laenor Velaryon in House of the Dragon. In the course of adapting Fire and Blood, House of the Dragon has made certain changes that, in our opinion, improve upon the source material, and one of those things is Laenor Velaryon. The first time we saw him, he was but a child at the royal court, the son of the current king's master of ships, and the queen who never was. It also appears as though Laenor is older than Laena, based entirely off the looks of the actors who played their pre-adolescence counterparts, and these are already 2 major changes to his character. Laenor Velaryon was born and raised at high tide on Driftmark, not King's Landing, and he was younger than Laena was. What is also different is the fact that House of the Dragon chose to include Laenor in Corlys's war for the Stepstones, which was simply impossible to do in Fire and Blood, because Laenor was literally 12 at the time the Sea Snake launched the war. But perhaps the biggest difference is the fact that they've made Laenor a warrior. Maybe it's because the way he earned his knighthood in the book is dubious at best, and they wanted to make him really earn that sir. Or maybe it's because they just wanted to give Laenor enough screen time so the audiences could really connect with him before giving him the classic Game of Thrones main character treatment. Either way, we were over the moon when we saw the handsome young Valyrian prince-to-be swoop in on Seasmoke and burn Triarchy archers left, right, and center. It makes sense why showrunners Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik chose this direction for Laenor's character. It gives him important character growth, whilst also filling in the gaping holes left behind by Archmaester Gildane in Fire and Blood, with a bit of fortifying storytelling. It also makes him seem like a more worthy candidate for Prince Consort because, as a veteran of a war himself and a dragon rider besides, Laenor is legitimately the best possible husband for Rhaenyra. The twist will come in when the audiences realize that what their marriage will be is basically a more drawn-out and less savory version of King Renly Renly Baratheon's marriage to Margaery Tyrell. One of the biggest confirmations Game of Thrones gave us for something that was only hinted at in Martin's books was the fact that Renly Baratheon was gay and had a relationship with Margaery's brother Loras. The TV show went a step further than simply confirming their relationship, and it is very possible that we will get a far more awkward version of Renly's married life with Rhaenyra and Laenor, because if the trailers are anything to go by, they are not even trying to hide their disdain. At least Rhaenyra isn't. Laenor just looks very sad because of the whole situation. He would rather spend time crossing swords with Sir Joffrey Lonmouth, or Carl Corey, we think, but has to suck it up for the good of the realm. But just because Laenor isn't going to be a part of the dance doesn't mean he will not be there in spirit or body, because his legacy goes beyond simply being a noble who was a known homosexual and was forced into a situation that ultimately spelled out disaster for all parties involved, similar to Renly and Margaery's marriage, actually. Laenor Velaryon's legacy, and how he will impact House of the Dragon. Almost a decade after Laenor departs his mortal coil, his eldest son sends out a call for so-called dragon seeds, and it is answered by a woman who claimed to have fathered Laenor's bastard sons. Called Merilda of Hull, her sons Adam and Alan attempted to claim some of the wild or riderless dragons that were residing in the Dragonmont, and the former manages to tame his alleged father's Mount Seasmoke. It is said that Adam's first attempt at riding Seasmoke ended with him saving his brother from the flames of one of the wild dragons, and thereafter both he and his brother were legitimized as true sons of House Velaryon by the Queen of the Blacks. While it seems impossible for Laenor to have fathered children given his preference, it isn't unlikely, as he was known to frequent the shipyards of Hull. The court fool Mushroom, however, who is yet to make his debut, alleges that Merilda's sons were fathered by Laenor's father, and that is a prospect we would love to see House of the Dragon play around with. Regardless of their true parentage, both boys end up reclaiming the stain that was put on House Velaryon's name to an extent. Adam would end up performing one of the bravest acts of loyalty the Seven Kingdoms had ever seen for a queen who didn't even view him as an ally, and Alan would go on to follow in his grandsire's footsteps in more than just lands and titles. With them would end House Velaryon's claim to greatness, as by the time the events of A Song of Ice and Fire come about, the once proud house has been reduced to being the bannerman of the impoverished claimant to the Iron Throne Stannis Baratheon, and are legendary only in name. Still, Laenor Velaryon's legacy cannot be disputed. He was the first and only Velaryon to claim a dragon that was entirely his, bringing the ancient house of seafarers and sailors to the level of the Dragon Lords that were once their kith and kin in Old Valyria. Laenor Velaryon and Seasmoke together represented the height of House Velaryon's power and ambitions, and they are remembered as a warning of what hubris can bring to a man and his family. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.
Is fighting this war. What role have you played in this council, Uncle, other than master of complaints?
Enough, Laenor.
Kings